Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with you all. My journey is very different than most when it comes to how I landed in immunotherapy. I am the Chief Communications Officer and co-founder of Encore Biotherapeutics, but my most important job in life is as mother. My daughter Sophie was 8.5 months old when she was diagnosed with a low-grade brain tumor called an optic pathway glioma. This was, as you can imagine, for a new mom, earth-shattering, especially when we found out that this disease was incurable. Survivable with a 90 to 95% success rate of survivability, but an 85% recurrence rate. So we were faced with many years of potential therapies and just really not understanding what was to come next. What was so terrifying as well is we didn't know anything about pediatric cancer. We'd never known about a child that had been diagnosed. We didn't know what the path looked like or what the world ahead would look like. But when we found out that treatments had not been advanced in 40 years for children like our daughter, that is when the earth below us shattered. How could we not have had advancements in 40 years? We didn't even have cell phones 40 years ago, yet here we are with children not getting access to care that is barely evolved. Not to mention that my daughter's type of brain tumor was not being studied or advanced in any ways. There were no treatment at St. Jude's. There were no clinical trials going on that we could get her involved in. It was toxic chemotherapy and only toxic chemotherapy as an option. My daughter's childhood was stolen from her, sadly. She endured 8 failed protocols over 7 years, 12 surgeries, 6 on her brain, a left-hand side weakness that has completely debilitated the use of her left arm, and she's about to have a horrific surgery to fix her foot, severe visual impairment, and she has now had over 80 MRIs. 80. And she's 13 years old right now. But something miraculous happened in 2018, and this is an actual sample of my daughter's brain tissue. I had at the time been raising millions of dollars for research because why not? Nobody else was going to research it. I had to. And I was funding research going on at the Technion Institute in Israel, hoping that they could find something for my little girl that would help her with this relentless disease that just wouldn't stop. That is when I found Dr. Anahi Jewett, who agreed to take my daughter's brain tissue, put it into humanized mouse models, and I was going to put those mice on a plane and fly them to Israel for testing. But she wanted to look at my daughter more because I told her about a lot of holistic approaches we were using with Sophie. Sophie actually became quite famous around the world for the use of medical cannabis. Ricky Lake, former talk show host, film star, found our family and included us in a Netflix documentary that followed us for 6 years called Weed the People. And through this film, we watched 5 children miraculously become better using cannabis alongside their Western medicine protocol. And Sophie was one of them. She became synonymous globally for having healing capabilities that they're not used to seeing in these children. Her immune system was being reestablished and rebooted when other kids were plummeting. She had seizure mitigation, where if you took her off the cannabinoid, she'd have 10 seizures a day. But if you kept her on, it'd be 1 every 3 to 6 months. And Dr. Jewett was really interested in this. And she wanted to study Sophie's blood, so I agreed to let her. And what she found was miraculous. She found that Sophie, from the neck down, had an incredibly boosted immune system. But once we were able to study the actual fluid on her brain, that is when our breakthrough happened. Sophie had 0 natural killer cells in her brain. None. Natural killer cells, which I'll explain a little bit more in a moment, are very important when it comes to killing cancer. And when Sophie didn't have these cells in her brain, there was only so much that her other cells in the chemotherapy could do, which explained or began to explain, we thought, the relentlessness of this tumor and why it just kept coming back. When she looked at Sophie and she learned these things, and we realized that we believed cannabis was rebooting the natural killer cells from the neck down, but not essentially affecting those in the brain, we thought we might just be onto something, because Dr. Jewett was known for her work in the field of natural killer cells. She'd been at UCLA at this point for 30 years, had been published over 100 times to the top medical journals in the world, and had a supercharged natural killer cell immunotherapy that in mice humanized mice was not only reversing all kinds of disease, but wasn't showing toxicity. And now I thought I'd found the Holy Grail, a treatment that doesn't have toxicity. It was shocking. And so we joined forces to create Encore Biotherapeutics, which has been operational for 7 years. Can you imagine a world where cancer isn't a scary word? Because that is the world I want to live in. Natural killer cells are cytotoxic lymphocytes that play a critical role in the innate immune system, the body's first line of defense. For those of you that don't understand natural killer cells, there's a very easy way for me to explain these cells. Imagine you have an army, and in that army is a general, and the general is responsible for finding the bad cells, identifying them, recruiting the army, and then together collectively attacking and killing these cells. But when your natural killer cells are down, when they're malfunctioned, which can be caused from obesity, genetic mutations, environmental factors, terrible stress, horrible diet, then that surveillance system is no longer there in order to find those cells and help the other immune cells identify and kill. T cells need a white flag on the cancer cell to see them, which is why we believe that it's not been quite as effective in solid tumors, whereas natural killer cells do not require that white flag on the surface. With our immunotherapy, NK-101, that is a supercharged natural killer cell immunotherapy using osteoclast and probiotic bacteria to charge these cells and make them more aggressive, we're seeing some very, very exciting things. Proprietary activation and expansion method is one that's been worked on for over 30 years that is protected, and now we have licensed those patents and we are working to commercialize this treatment. It has a superior safety profile. We have yet to see a negative adverse reaction in human beings or animal models, and there was some 500 animal models studied before we got into patients. We are seeing synergies with existing treatments. So this can be used as a monotherapy or a combinational therapy. It's a broad application against multiple disease states, whereas we are working in cancer currently. The goal eventually is to pivot to autoimmune diseases and other immune-related diseases, longevity, prevention, stuff of that nature, because our goal is to fix the human immune system and help the body do what it was built and meant to do, attack anything that is foreign and eradicate it. We have a unique phenotype that targets both stem cells and differentiated cells, which is very exciting because therapies that we see on the market today, like chemotherapies and radiation, don't see these cancer stem cells. They're left behind, and which recurrence grows from. We have an orthogonal mechanism of action, and we're seeing enhanced killing, enhanced durability, and prolonged survival in the tumor microenvironment in that very toxic area that the tumor creates that keeps the other white blood cells from being able to see and penetrate it. And we are seeing a reconstitution of the human immune system. We have patients that are now 2 years out, and their immune function is still working over a year and a half past their last infusion. To date, through a palliative care program, we've treated we've given 21 infusions, treated 8 patients with no negative side effects. And what's exciting about this is it's not just blood cancer. If anyone knows the field well, blood cancer has been where there's been the most success. And many companies today are pivoting to autoimmune because they aren't seeing the persistence or the longevity of these cells and the ability for them to continue to kill long term. On top of that, because of the advocate that I am, which is really where my heart is trying to bring better treatments to market for patients, especially in children, we are documenting this entire journey through our documentary called Saving Sophie, The Road to the Cure. We want more people to understand the challenges that we're seeing in cancer care for patients, and also what these patients are just simply going through. They deserve better, and that is what we're hopefully here to provide. This is my daughter, Sophie, now. This was when she was getting her very first infusion. And after 7 years of toxic treatments, she's now had 4 infusions of NK-101. She was patient number 2 and went 1 hour after patient number 1. That is how much research I did on these cells. That is how safe I believed these cells to be. And guess what? I was right. She's doing phenomenal. She's never been healthier. Her vision is the best it's been in 7 years. She has restored immune function, and we're seeing necrosis in her tumor that in 5 years did not shrink on the most toxic therapies, the last therapy being 4 chemos at once. She was so sick, the last 13 months of her last chemotherapy treatment, she could not go to school the entire year. At one point, she was seizing all day, every day. She had a horrible C. diff gut infection. Her life had been stolen from her. But on this treatment, she's in school, she's hanging out with her friends, and she's enjoying life. This is what we saw after the second 2 infusions that we gave her this past summer. And in only 2.5 months, we believe we're seeing the tumor break down, where in 5 years, we didn't see a single change other than for her tumor to grow. And she feels great, which is even more exciting. This is one of our blood cancer patients. And in order to really understand this chart, right here is where he was on a treatment called Calquence, and his leukemia, CLL, began to rebound. We gave him a very low dose of only 190 million cells. The field is giving billions at a time, day after day, week after week, month after month. He got 1 infusion of 190 million cells, and his cancer fell off a cliff. This was only in 58 days. We then gave him another infusion 7 months later of only 190 million cells. And now all of the tumors in his chest and abdomen are gone using combinational therapy, as you'll see listed here on the side of the screen, right here. And the infiltration in his bone marrow is down to 0.23% when Mayo Clinic couldn't get it below 20% in 3 years. These are some very exciting slides that represent the parallel that we're seeing as the NK cells get stronger and the percentages go up. We're seeing a decline in the infiltration of the cancer in the blood and the bone marrow. As the tumor cell infiltration goes down, as do the B cells. And in this type of disease state, the B cells are very toxic. This is a very exciting slide. This is hot off the presses. No one has seen this yet. And this is 4 of our patients and their NK cell response and the interferon gamma secretion response. This is very important when killing cancer. And what you see is many of these patients, except for this one right here, started out at like next to nothing. And what we're seeing is a consistent trend over time with our patients with this going up in their after their immunotherapy has been administered. This is an early sign that the therapy is having a direct response on the immune system in a way that will help cancer killing to occur. This was I love showing this picture because this is the very first time an infusion was given to our daughter, and this is the very first bag of therapy that ever went into her. This is my husband, Josh. And as you can imagine, after years and years and years of fighting to try and find something that would save our daughter's life when she was otherwise out of options, this moment was like reaching the top of Mount Everest. I'll put the flag down when her cancer is gone, but this was a moment that will live in our hearts forever. And to speak a little bit more about the words on the page, we are doing a dose escalation plan with our patients. We first did safety, so that's why those were very, very low doses in the beginning, spread far apart. We are now treating our patients with 300 million cells. After that, we're doing 600 million cells 28 days later. And 28 days after that, we're doing 1.2 billion. And we're pausing at that dose escalation to see what kind of response we continue to get, which is some of those biomarker points that I showed you in the last slide. Once we get FDA approval, which we hope to be submitting our application here in the coming months, and we hope to be starting human trials in the United States, that's when we're going to get more aggressive with the types of amounts of cells that we're giving when we go through those safety phases. This is what my daughter looked like on chemotherapy. She was sick. She was disabled. She had no life. She was in and out of the hospital constantly, dozens of hospital stays. She has had so many occurrences of vomiting. She now has horrible long-term gut issues that we're trying to heal. But this is what my daughter looks like today after using natural killer cells and after not being on toxic therapies since 2019. Given this unique safety profile of NK cells, we believe InCore's approach will lead to less toxic, more effective cellular therapies. The off-the-shelf nature of this therapy will allow us to offer global access for cutting-edge therapeutics. This is off-the-shelf. We use allogeneic natural killer cells from healthy adults whose NK cell function is at the peak of their performance, and then we make it even stronger. So this is something that we feel will have the ability to not only create here in the United States, but then ship globally to patients all over the world. And on top of that, we do have a philanthropic angle. We created a foundation many years ago called savingsophie.org. It is through this charity that we hope to raise money to help our patients receive care, since currently these treatments are out of pocket. And they're not cheap. They're a lot cheaper than if you were getting CAR T or some of the other immune therapies today, but it's still not affordable for many people. And nobody should die because they don't have money in the bank. No one should watch their family members succumb to this awful disease because they're not wealthy. So through Saving Sophie, we hope to change that and help more around the world. That is all I have for you today. I want to thank you so much for your time. Again, my name is Tracy Ryan, and I appreciate your time and attention.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Ellen Wagner. I work for Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy. So we're an advocacy organization that focuses on Duchenne, Becker, and carrier health. We like to call them the dystrophinopathies. We're getting that word popularized. So if you want to use it, that would be great. We're here today to talk about something really important, and that's the role of advocacy in drug development. And any of us who've experienced a patient going through the process of a drug trial understands how important the planning in drug development really is. And the role of an advocacy organization in drug development really serves as the objective voice of the patient experience. So we take on a regular basis the thoughts of our patients that are in our community, and we synthesize them, and we're able to then present that voice in a succinct manner to our stakeholders. And that could be our industry partners, it could be our healthcare professionals, and it could be the regulatory organizations. And when the patient voice is included early as we look at drug development, everybody's experience in the process of a trial is much easier to follow. So I'll give you a minute or two of my background, and then I'm going to introduce my panel members here. My son Tim was diagnosed with Duchenne in 2000, and the landscape of Duchenne in 2000 was very different than what it is today. My son Tim unfortunately passed away at 19, about 9 years ago. And I'm still here because it's really important to me that other families don't face what Tim faced in his pathway with Duchenne. And we've had a lot of successes, but we're not there yet. We still don't really have meaningful therapies that will change the course of a life over long term, although we're getting closer every year. So that's my role. And to my left here is Chris, and I'll let Chris introduce himself, and we'll go down the line.
Thank you very much. I'm Chris White. As Georgia mentioned, I'm a mucosal melanoma survivor. After all known therapies failed, I was eventually pointed in the direction of TIL therapy for solid tumors in a clinical trial. End up getting into the trial, and it saved my life as I was on my way to hospice. So I actually became the very last patient ever dosed in what is now known as the first ever advanced cell therapy for any solid tumor, commercially known as Amtagvi. But it cured me as I was on my way, I said, to hospice after everything had failed, and I had no clue that clinical trials could do this and or cell therapies. And I've become an author, an advocate, and a speaker. And I'm here to make as much noise as possible.
Hi, I'm Tracy Ryan. I think most of you were already in the room. For anybody that walked in, I'm the co-founder and chief communications officer of Encore Biotherapeutics, and I am the mother to cancer survivor Sophie Ryan, who endured 7 years of toxic chemotherapies, failed 8 different protocols, legally blind, left-hand side weakness, but is thriving today on our company's non-toxic cancer immunotherapy called NK101, which is a supercharged natural killer cell immunotherapy. The goal of our therapy is to work towards fixing the human immune system so we can activate and boost the cells in your system that are responsible for identifying, recruiting other immune cells, and killing cancer.
Wonderful. My name is Salman. I'm a practicing neurologist at UT Southwestern and faculty member. I also lead clinical development and medical affairs at Secretome Therapeutics. We're a cell therapy company developing cardiac progenitor cells to improve the muscle of the heart and the skeletal muscle in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. We're thankful to work closely with PPMD. They do great work. And our company's focus has always been that patients aren't endpoints, they are the point. And that's clear from the beginning to the end of development and beyond. So I'm thankful to be here with my co-panelists and excited to tell you more about what we're doing.
I'm just going to move seats because I'm sitting right behind the podium and I can't see the audience on the other side. So pardon me for a second. This is much better. I was looking at the podium instead. So we're going to start with some questions to our patient advocates that are up here and just talk about what the role of patient advocacy and drug development has been in their personal stories. So Tracy, one of the things that I know you're interested in is what part of therapy design or access is most frustrating and what would you do to change it?
We are enduring a lot of this as we speak. We have a non-toxic immunotherapy that is not showing any type of adverse reactions in now 8 patients. We're about to treat the 9th. Yet the hurdle to get this to patients is the same as a toxic chemotherapy that could cause the life to end and can cause severe harm long term. So we're looking at currently is where these programs are being created really in silos. When you're looking at the path to market for any kind of therapy or drug, you're going through these rigorous processes that aren't designed for patients who are desperate and who need care today. It's designed to be more beneficial to the institution. What do they want to see? How much information do they need? How much money do they want to charge you? And patients are dying. We can't wait 6 years to get through phase 1 through phase 3 trials. Many of the people that I know today won't survive that. We really need to have other opportunities out there for, especially when you have therapies that aren't showing toxicity. And the FDA knows that natural killer cells have a no to low toxic profile because there have been so many people that have gotten through that. We need easier pathways. We need other states to come on board with the compassionate use care programs that are happening where you get IND approval and you can get into care quickly. And we need to be thinking about these patients who aren't going to survive. So for me, it's really about making the system easier and not so difficult and lowering the cost of it because it's not only not affordable for companies and many drugs fail in their process to get there. If they are made available, oftentimes patients can't afford them.
So really we're talking about risk benefit and the risk benefit changes depending on what the outcome of the disease state really is. And in rare disease, and particularly in pediatric rare disease, we've done a lot of patient studies. We've published on it. We actually have presented 2 white papers to the FDA and work with regulatory really closely. And it turns out the parents of children that have a very grim outcome are willing to take a very high risk. And sometimes the regulatory agencies aren't quite on board on that risk level. So one of the things that is important in patient advocacy is understanding what is the risk benefit, what risk is your community willing to take, and then how do you best communicate that back to regulatory to try to shorten that timeline.
Absolutely.
Chris, you talked about patient financial burden. Do you want to give a few seconds about that?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I didn't even learn about TIL therapy until I ran out of options. And I went back and forth doing everything that existed, spending God knows how much money just to do all these therapies that made me incredibly sick and cost I don't know how much money. And if I didn't have financial support, you know, with my family, there's no way I could have ever done it. But the financial burden both before, during, and after, you know, since 2018 has like devastated me. I filed for bankruptcy last year. And there was enough focus on, you know, the post infusion and survivorship that there is leading up to it. You know, I'm sure there would be a lot more success stories. And, you know, if someone can get behind the treatment beforehand, as well as, you know, being like having a peer connect of sorts. But everything costs money and time is money, and there's no more valuable thing than time. And it's, you know, unfortunately, I qualified to do TIL 9 months before I did it, but they didn't tell me about it. And then after I failed everything and spent all my money, then I did it. And it's a one-time treatment. And so, needless to say, I was a little upset when I learned, you know, after I spent all that money, you know, to get to something, you know, to have it cure me, you know, and it was just ridiculous. It was just ridiculous.
You know, we talk a lot about the cost of treatment and cost of trials in our organization, and we work really closely with drug developers like Salman's company. in designing the child to have the least amount of financial impact on families. The FDA is very strict about what you can reimburse and what you can't reimburse, how things can be reimbursed, and we try to work within those parameters. But what happens is oftentimes only those who have are able to participate in a trial. People who are already struggling socioeconomically often can't take the time off. They can't make the travel. Even if the travel's reimbursed, if you're 6 or 8 hours away from a clinic in a rare disease, often that's the case for a trial, you just don't have that kind of PTO to take those days. And so I think we encourage our industry partners on a regular basis to think about how is it that we can get the treatment to the patient and not cause the patient to go bankrupt like Chris in the process. And I think Salman can speak a little bit to that.
Absolutely. So as we develop a best-in-class cell therapy that reduces inflammation, prevents fibrosis, but also is very safe. Now, as Ellen is discussing, when I have patients come to me with Duchenne or other rare diseases, they travel for hours. They're in a wheelchair, parents have to take time off. You can imagine the socioeconomic issues that come with this. It's simply not fair for us as drug developers to not accommodate patients. And when patients and caregivers define the question, science finds better answers. And so what we're doing to innovate in this space is to do cell therapy at home, where the patients are, to give patients better comfort, to increase adherence, and balance that risk-benefit profile so that no patient is left behind. And that's really a testament to our team and the commitment that we've learned from PPMD, from patients, from caregivers. They want it, and we can deliver that.
Another thing I'd like to touch on with my panel members here, we at PPMD do a lot of work with federal advocacy. We have every year we have an advocacy trip where patients come with us, and we organize trips to the Hill, and we have a very specific agenda that we speak about. And we're bipartisan. Our supporters come from both sides of the aisle, thankfully, and it's been like that for the last 20 years that we've been in Washington on a regular basis. And I think that as you involve patients in things like advocacy, you give them the opportunity to tell their story, which is so important, but you empower them to feel like they're doing something impactful for their children or themselves. So often when someone is struck with a life-altering illness, the idea that you feel so powerless is one of the mental obstacles in what's happening. And so I do encourage other advocacy organizations to try to empower their patients. And maybe Chris and Tracy could speak a little bit about their role in advocacy or what their thoughts are.
No, absolutely. We also every year for probably 5 or 6 years now go to Capitol Hill during September for the Brainstorm Summit and for CureFest. They have this incredible event called The Climb, where they bring all the teenagers together, and the little ones are overseen by the teenagers. And they call it door knocking, and they go door to door, members of Congress, and they advocate for Give Kids a Chance Act, the STAR Act, and many of these other acts that originally were shut down this past January. And thankfully, through a lot of the work of advocacy groups and people like myself, those have gotten passed in the House, and now I think they just got passed in the Senate the other day as well. Yeah. So we've got these programs that we continue to fight for, as well as the Congressional Pediatric Cancer Caucus. Every year they have a symposium on Capitol Hill. We've been speaking for that for many, many years. And the Moonshot Summit was, with the last administration, was a group that we also worked very closely with. We went to the White House like 5 different times, joined many people that were experts from all around the country that were hand-selected to meet with the Moonshot and talk about the problems that we're seeing, the barriers to entry, the costs that these patients are enduring, the travel. My family's had to raise $500,000 on GoFundMe's to stay alive and just to keep us from bankruptcy. And thankfully, I'm a marketing person by trade and was able to do that. But when you've got individuals like Chris who maybe don't have a 30-year marketing background, it becomes a lot more difficult to get those things that you need in order to care for your child and keep them alive. We've spent $250,000 on out-of-pocket care just for the infusion therapies that she's received, which has kept her alive. And I'll be honest, without this, I don't know that my daughter would still be breathing today. So the advocacy work that is done on the Hill is paramount. We're seeing a bit of an attack on science right now, and pediatric cancer funding. We're seeing clinical trials be shut down. We're seeing people lose their jobs in scientific facilities and hospitals all across the nation. And this can't keep going. This can't keep happening. We need more research, not less. We need more funding, not less. And we need more grant programs that are easier for drug developers like myself that aren't just institutional. It's much harder to get that money when you actually have a company. And we're so much closer than people that are still in the lab that need another 5 to 10 years to go. So those are some hurdles that we've endured and some things that we're trying to do to take action.
And Chris?
So for the past 3 or 4 years, I've been going to the Hill with the Melanoma Research Foundation, Community Oncology Alliance. I've done some work with the Every Life Rare Disease Legislative Act. I work with the NCI. I'm a patient advocate steering committee member. I'm a CDMRP grant reviewer. I do everything I can to get involved and be as loud as I can, because nobody's ever heard of my cancer. It's so extremely rare, but it's a solid tumor cancer, but they have heard of more common cancers like breast cancer and lung cancer and so forth. And so I try to engage more with the cell therapy specific organizations, blood banking, real tight with the Emily Whitehead Foundation, but to be as loud as I can to share that, behind every treatment is a patient and is a life. And if it's not you, it could be someone or, someone you're related to. So the exact same thing, more funding, more research, just more putting a name next to the data point, to make it personal.
I want to ask Ellen here, because when you think about rare disease, neurology is full of rare diseases, and think about what happens 20 years ago to today. Not many diseases have had treatments developed, and I'd love for you to talk about briefly what advocacy has done through PPMD and Duchenne organizations for what treatment was like 20 years ago and how it is today.
Sure. It's kind of a success story. We're not at the end yet, but we're getting closer. So I'm proud to say that we've changed the life expectancy for a very difficult disease. And we've changed it piece by piece. So we had a healthcare practitioner who took a look at these boys, a neurologist, and said, why don't we treat what we see? Before 25 years ago, even when my son was diagnosed in 2000, the neurologist who diagnosed him, first the office, when I made to make the appointment at the neurologist, said, well, your disease is in the category of we can't do anything anyway, so there's no rush to come in. We'll see you in 6 months. Okay, you just told my 2-year-old is going to die, but you're not going to see me for 6 months. That's not going to fly. So it turns out I knew some board members, and he had a lot of calls, and we saw him in 2 weeks instead. But that was where we were at. When my son was 6, there was a program in Cincinnati that was starting to put together comprehensive care. And there was a neurologist who was trained under Victor Dubertz, who was a famous neurologist in England. She came to Cincinnati and she said, why don't we treat what we see? Let's do something different here. So I was really fortunate. My son was accepted into her clinic. And so kids are given steroids. That's the only standard of care in Duchenne. Steroids have a slew of side effects, including they don't grow. Okay, for the boys who it's important to be tall, why don't we give them growth hormone? Wow, look at that, it works, now they grow. That one of the things that she did. So she started to really, Dr. Brenda Wong, started to treat what she saw. There was a pulmonologist out of Pittsburgh, and then he went to Memphis. And there was a pulmonologist out of New Jersey who was using what technology invented, which was really like a backwards vacuum cleaner. And it's called a cough assist. So boys would mostly in the 80s and early 90s die of respiratory failure. As their muscles weaken, their diaphragm weakened, and they're unable to cough. If you can't cough the crap out of your lungs, it becomes infected and you die of pneumonia. So these physicians said, well, wait a minute, let's use this cough assist. They got the SMA physicians involved. There was an SMA physician and a Duchenne physician that wrote the standard of care so that we could get cough assist approved by insurance. Boys don't die of respiratory anymore. Then the cardiologist started to look at this and say, well, wait a minute, heart failure is heart failure. We treat heart failure in tens of thousands of people. Why aren't we treating it in these boys? We started to do MRIs. Turns out that they have fibrosis in their heart much earlier than anyone thought. So we started with preventative heart care, improved the life of heart care as well. So as we break down little pieces, in different areas, it turns out that the course of life for these boys is much better. And what's gone along with every one of those changes is the advocacy that allows those treatments to be paid for by insurance, works with the FDA and regulatory agencies. What we've done in our organization is we've certified 39 centers now that provide a minimum of care, so that if a family is saying, where do I go? They have a place to go that's the area of expertise. If there's a rural clinic, they can call one of our clinics and we're happy to help them out. So by breaking things down and going step by step, as Salman said, we've changed the course of a disease. The start of changing things was the MD Care Act, which was like 25 years old now in Washington, that put some focus on muscular dystrophies, all muscular dystrophies, in the National Institutes of Health. And prior to having federal money, there was no way to move forward. And so that was the start of our advocacy. And one of the things advocacy organizations are able to do, like I said earlier, is just take the collective patient voice and bring it in front of where we can best exact change. And maybe you can talk a little bit about the drug development side of that, Salman.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have to improve care for people who are in front of us. Right? No one should die just because we're trying to develop something 10 years from now. That's not okay. We have to treat patients in front of us. And hope isn't a trial outcome, but it's why patients come into trials. And so we have to listen to them. Now, you've heard stories from the panelists up here, and you can hear the nuance. Do you think the FDA knows all these nuances? Probably not, but they mean well. And I think this is where advocacy comes into drug development at the foundation, from the very beginning, where there's conversations with the FDA, there's conversations with the company, the doctors treating the patients, the patient advocacy groups, the payers. Once you get all this lined up, the goal is to get the drug across the finish line with the FDA understanding what matters. So, for example, Duchenne is a muscle disease. These patients start to get weak in their childhood, they stop walking, their hearts, their lungs fail, they're in a wheelchair, and it leads to early mortality. But you can imagine, as you get weaker and weaker, your hands start to matter more. So, right, I see people holding their phones, not because you're bored. I think you're taking notes, so we're good here. And
exactly what they're doing.
That's right. So when your hands are that important, what really matters for an outcome is, can I take this and drink? Can I text and communicate? Can I move my wheelchair? It becomes less relevant when I'm in a wheelchair. Can I move my legs? Because that's not coming back. And so those are the kinds of nuances that come from patients, the caregivers, the clinicians that treat these patients, that we have to relay to the FDA and make drug development a team sport from the very beginning.
And often what we see are the measurements that are used by regulatory in deciding whether or not a treatment can prove efficacy are not necessarily related to what the patient needs in their day-to-day life, as Salman was saying. For example, a wheelchair is a pretty good replacement for your legs, but when you can no longer move at the shoulder and the arm, that becomes very difficult to live with. I'll tell you a funny story. I'm not the mother of the year. My son often reminded me of that. Once I asked for diamond earrings and he told me I didn't really deserve them because I did yell. Well, anyone who lived with that child would have yelled. But I went out one day and I left him home and he was in a wheelchair, but he mostly good use of his arms. He was an early teen and we had put in a remote control door so he could get out of the house, remote control to get out of the garage so he could leave the house in an emergency. And I felt relatively comfortable leaving him. Well, it was right after the time change and I did not think at all about the fact that it was going to get dark out. I didn't leave any lights on and he can't reach the light switches. So I came home, he's sitting in his room in pitch black and pissed as hell at me because I've left him home in the dark. Furious with me. Again, I was not getting Mother of the Year. So, I apologize, tell him I'll never do it again. Like 3 weeks later, I do it again, right? I'm busy picking up another kid. I don't think about it. I came home and he's like, I foiled your plan. I was like, what was my plan? I know you wanted to leave me in the dark, but I fixed it. So he rolled over to the drawer with the utensils in it, and he pulled out like a spaghetti thing, the thing with the claws in it that you pick up spaghetti, and he was able to move his arm up and click the light switch with the end of the spaghetti thing and turn the lights on for himself. But that just illustrates how important arm use is and how it's really hard to replace for the leg use. So when you work with regulatory, like Salman said, if they don't know that in your patient group, then they don't know what outcomes you should be looking for. And I don't know if Tracy or Chris has any other thoughts on how important outcomes are in the design of a study.
I mean, 100%. When you're looking at what's being done to the children that are in treatment today with chemotherapy, it is debilitating them long term. We're giving them drugs that are known to cause secondary cancers, and those secondary cancers are often terminal. So really looking at the survivorship of these patients is so critical. And I think one of the things that frustrates me the absolute most is the fact that we are not given guidance on how to care for their bodies, nutrition, as far as nutrition is concerned, as far as how much exercise do they need to get, what are the fact that we don't have a therapist that's given to us as soon as our child is old enough to know what's happening to them, and there's not a mental health care plan in place for these kids is also very, very troubling to me. Doctors don't have to go to school for nutrition, and they definitely don't have to go to school to think about what's going to happen to the kids emotionally. My daughter right now is suffering from OCD. We think ADHD. She's got severe anxiety and was just diagnosed with, and I'm proud to say, mild PTSD, if you can imagine, mild. 32, where the 30 is the low line. The fact that she is only mild, I truly believe is a testament to my husband and I and the happiness and joy we've tried to bring into her life. But had we been these parents that couldn't be flexible and work from home and come care for her whenever she needed, and we had to have full-time jobs. I've been an entrepreneur since Sophie was diagnosed, so I had that freedom of scheduling. I mean, I can't tell you how many people lose their jobs, lose their homes, live in their cars. None of this is thought about when they're taking into consideration what these endpoints are for these kids, what these protocols look like, and the care that they're getting outside of the poison that's just being pumped into their bodies.
I think those are good points about the sequela of treatment, right? In development, if you're not looking for these issues, they just become unknown and you follow them commercially. But I think it's important, if you highlight it, people will then look for it in their care practice. Things will get covered by insurance, and patients holistically will do better. And so thanks for shedding light on all those long-term issues that show up.
And I think one of our challenges that we've been working on this year is merging the commercial and the investigative. So families often think, I just need my kid in a drug trial. I just need to find a trial that they're eligible for. But trial isn't care. And so what happens when the trial's happening at a research center, but the care is happening somewhere else? And how do we meld those two so that we're not exposing the child to unnecessary investigational procedures? So one of the things that we started working on this year is many trials require a cardiac MRI, which requires contrast. So we've been working with drug development companies, asking them to provide the unanalyzed MRI scan back to whoever's providing the care, so that child doesn't need a care MRI as well. And particularly when you're talking about older kids who are in wheelchairs, who have contractures, it's really hard to put them in through an MRI to start with. Why are we doing two? So I think that's a good point as we look at child development and drug development. How do we best meld it with what is the ongoing care and be sure that the two are cooperating with each other as opposed to each other? I don't know, Chris, if you have anything to add in this arena.
You know, I often tell people that I'm in the people business. People are, they need hope, and that is what I do. You know, if I would have known about, you know, all of the actual options that were available or that I could at least have tried, I would have got behind them and at least had a choice. But since it wasn't brought up to me till the very last, you know, option as I became a non-billable patient, I had no clue. And so it's extremely important, I believe, to create that education awareness for, you know, not just the patients, but all the different oncology and rare disease settings, to be very open about if you don't have what, you know, your patient, you know, would need, but to be bold enough to at least, you know, inform them that there are things, you know, elsewhere, and, you know, even though it might not be under their care, but that they're out there, and there is that hope. And so that's really all a patient wants, is a chance. You know, but if they're not even given that, you know, and it's like, you know, a last option, then it's you know, what are you going to choose between going to hospice or this, you know, possibly curative, you know, treatment? And so, you know, that I believe is a huge barrier that, you know, is just I continue to work on to break.
I could make one quick point, Ellen. One of the things that we're seeing currently is, again, we've got this immunotherapy that's non-toxic. We've got a palliative care program that patients can enroll in. And what we've found in multiple clinicians is they're like, no, we're not going to support this. We're not going to let you try this other therapy. We're not going to help with blood draws. We're not going to help schedule MRIs. You're going to die. There's nothing we can do for you. There's no treatment that we're going to give you other than something that's going to extend life a little bit, but make you far sicker and make your life far harder. The fact that we're not communicating as a medical society and that we're not more open to alternative options when the patient is out of options is really frustrating and heartbreaking. My own hospital does not support my daughter's immunotherapy, even though our neuro-oncologist trained them all, which is amazing to have on our team. But nonetheless, they still keep trying to say, no, let's give Sophie more toxicity. Let's give her a brain surgery she doesn't need, because they're not taking the time to learn about these other options that could be potentially beneficial when used as a combo or a monotherapy.
And I think one of the roles of advocacy organizations is to take that kind of information and synthesize it and do a better job educating. I think all of the players that we're talking about, regulatory, healthcare providers, patients, everybody's in it for the right reason. I don't think anyone goes to medical school to kill the patient, right? That's not why they're physicians. And they're not in regulatory because they want to prevent your treatment. Regulatory has a clear path ahead, and that's to make sure that patients are safe. And they can only work with what they know. And so the role of an advocacy organization is to educate all of those invested parties, including our industry partners. And that's what we call the companies we work with in our organization, is our industry partners, because they're key to our future. When I started in Duchenne, when my son was diagnosed in 2000, we would go to conferences, and all we had in conference to talk about what was coming forward were mice on a wheel going around. And I don't know if you know this, but there are slow twitch mice and fast twitch mice. And depending on which mice you give the drug to, how fast they go around the wheel and how fast they grow their muscles. And if you see a mice that has their myostatin adjusted, they become like mice that look like bulls because their muscles grow so big, but they still have these itty bitty feet, very gross looking. So if I never see mice on a wheel again, I'd be really happy. But we've come a long way because we've partnered with industry, and we've worked to synthesize the patient voice and make it easier for industry to become involved. When we can say to industry, here is our latest patient survey, and here is the level of risk they're willing to take regarding cardiac care, it's much easier for industry to get behind that and say there's a clearer path to regulatory approval, so investors are going to invest their money here. And all of us are competing for the same time, the same dollars, the same. And so when we talk about our individual backgrounds in different disease states, that's where advocacy organizations can be so important, is overcoming some of the education that is difficult when you're a parent. When you're a parent, I always say this in a rare disease, you often know more than the clinicians that you encounter. And the absolute worst thing to encounter is an ER resident. In my experience, they are the worst. The intern doesn't know enough yet, so they're not going to cause you any trouble. Typically, the attending's really busy and they're happy to have your information, but those residents are out to prove themselves. And I can't tell you, I've been in more than one argument with a resident in my life. And it's rough. And we print emergency cards. We have an app with emergency information. All of this is laid out because there's a series of things that can happen in an emergency that can be damaging to somebody with Duchenne or Becker muscular dystrophy. And you're still arguing with this resident who thinks they know the most. And so again, it's about education. It's about understanding. It's about gathering that customer voice, that patient voice, and making sure that all the players are aware of what's important to the patient. I don't know, Simon, what you want to add from both of your roles as a physician and drug development.
I think we all want the same thing. We want drugs that work, that are safe across the finish line. And to reduce time, cost, and risk, it's clear. Work with people like PPMD. These agencies, these patient advocacy groups have a clear track record of success. If you want to level the playing field clinically, right, so that patients come into the trial the same way, you have outcomes that the FDA understands, you have patients on your side, right? That trust is massively important for these rare diseases, whether you're a physician treating them or an industry partner working on this disease. So keep it in the beginning, keep it throughout, keep it at the end. And I think that's the key to success, to get to the finish line.
Thank you. I think we have enough time for like one more comment from each of us. Chris, why don't you start?
You know, Tracy highlighted this a lot, you know, both in her talk right before this panel. But the toxicities, you know, that are involved with a lot of the, you know, treatments before, you know, a patient can finally get to one that, you know, is effective. And, you know, as a palliative, you know, medicine, when there really isn't any options, you know, time is ticking. And so there's got to be this like sense of urgency. You know, I always used to tell everybody, like, I would drink a gallon of gasoline if that's what I was told to do, because I was willing to do anything. But I didn't want to wait till, you know, next week. I wanted to do it now, you know, like, and nobody's sense of urgency is ever going to be more than the patient. But when you're waiting on, you know, prior authorizations, or, you know, there's so many logistics that go into, you know, coordinating, you know, the multidisciplinary care team that has, you know, to be in place for a patient, you know, to do an advanced therapy. It's extremely annoying on both the patient and their family and anybody involved that's trying to actually get to, you know, the finish line. And so just having that sense of urgency, but the communication, you know, like across the board, you know, like having to be the middleman across all your different doctors, oncologists, the trial navigator, the pharma company, whoever, it doesn't matter. Like, but the sense of urgency has to be, you know, if it's bars at a 10, it's got to be at a 15. Just, you know, do it not, you know, tomorrow, do it yesterday, that fast. So.
Yeah, and for my family, we've had to become not just entrepreneurs, but scientists and fundraisers in order to find an option for our daughter. Thankfully, I had the capabilities to meet those three goals. I'm still in the fundraising process. As I'm sure many of you know, it is treacherous out there right now, which is also slowing down progress. But we shouldn't have to do that. I shouldn't have to be the one out there trying to find something to save my own daughter's life because there's not enough research being done specifically in pediatrics. When I first started going to Capitol Hill 9 years ago, only 3.8% of all government funding was going towards pediatric cancer research. Investors won't invest in it because the class of patients, the number of patients that are affected by pediatric cancer every year are too small. It's still considered a rare disease, even though it is the number one disease killer of children in America. Let that sink in. Now we're at 8% of all government funding, 92%. 92% is still going to adults. And we're still trying to find ways to advance pediatric cancer research in a way that can help save these children with these severe unmet needs. I mean, 75% of the life is lost when these kids get a disease and don't have a positive outcome. These are our next presidents, our next inventors, our next world leaders that can come in and help shape this world into a better place for us all to live in. They deserve more, and advocacy is critical and key. So all I would like to do is ask the audience to please use your voices, use your tools, use your Rolodexes to start spreading the word more about the care that these patients need and the funding that needs to be allocated to them and the pathways that need to be cleared. Thank you.
Salman, what's your last thoughts on this?
Patient voice should be part of all of this. So whether you're a patient yourself or know somebody, we know at Secretome Therapeutics, myself, patients are our North Star, and that's what drives us every day.
And I would just echo what my fellow panelists have said. Advocacy is key, but the patient voice is the most important. As we look at writing protocols, as we look at what consents are like, as we look at setting up trials, how do we make sure that the patient's voice is included in that process? And then how do we connect the research side to the care side? Because again, that's key for the patient. So thank you all today. I appreciate your time and have a nice afternoon.
Thank you. Cheers.